On the day my daughter's first child was celebrated, I was asked not to speak. It wasn't loud. There was no scene, just a slight touch on my elbow as I reached for one of the iced lemon cupcakes. My daughter's friend, her best friend since college, the one she now calls her real sister, leaned in, smiling to wide, and said, "Let's let Lauren shine today, okay?" Shine, as if my presence had ever cast a shadow over her, as if being her mother for 34 years, stitching her dance costumes by hand, making her lunches, holding her through every heartbreak had somehow dulled her light. That was the moment I knew I was no longer wanted, only tolerated, and even that was conditional. I'm Jeanette Hall, 68. And that was the moment I knew my voice had been quietly written out of the story of my own family. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The baby shower was held at a rental hall in Frederick, Maryland, one of those refurbished barns with Edison lights strung from exposed beams, soft blue linen on round tables, and mason jars filled with eucalyptus and baby's breath. I had helped pay for it, quietly, discreetly, from the leftover funds I'd kept in a separate account after my husband died. I hadn't offered. Lauren had called weeks earlier and said she just needed a little bit extra to make the space special. I wired her $2,000 the next morning. No thank you card, not even a text, when I arrived. I found my name handwritten on a place card at the very back table, near the catering door, tucked between a woman I didn't know and a mother-in-law who barely acknowledged me. No one said it, but I could tell I wasn't meant to be seen or heard. I sat there, smiling when it was expected, clapping when the diaper cake was unveiled, nodding as they played games that involved melted candy bars in diapers. A friend of hers asks, "And who are you again?" Not even unkindly, just absent-mindedly. I answered, "I'm the mother." She smiled and said, "Of the groom?" I told her no. And something flickered behind her eyes, confusion, then polite retreat. They'd made a slideshow of Lauren's life. I'd sent them dozens of photos, first steps, dance recitals, our beach trips to Chincoteague. None of mine were used. They chose ones from college, with her husband, with friends I recognized only to pictures from her childhood, both ones taken by her father, not a trace of me. That day, I wore a dove grey blouse and soft slacks, a gift I'd bought myself at Macy's. I had my nails done pale pink and wore the opal earrings my mother gave me when Lauren was born. I looked nice. I felt like a ghost. Later that evening, driving home in the quiet hum of my Camry, I didn't cry. I turned off the radio and drove in silence, just listening to the way the wind moved around the mirrors. It felt like a funeral, though no one had died, not officially. But something did end that day, or maybe it had ended long before, and I just hadn't wanted to name it. It's strange how a person can become invisible in a room full of people they helped build. You think motherhood will earn you something, if not love, then memory. At least memory. Instead, I became the woman you usher to the corner table, the woman you ask not to speak so someone else can shine, the woman whose silence, once out of kindness, now becomes the condition for inclusion I didn't want to be. Difficult, I never had been. I was the quiet one, the one who packed extra snacks in the car, who kept a thermos of tea at every soccer game, the one who stayed up, sewing buttons and letting down hems so she wouldn't feel embarrassed at school. I was never loud with my love. I just did things. I stayed, but they forget what staying costs you. I went home that night and made myself a small cup of chamomile tea. I sat in the chair by the window, the one with the frayed armrest and the small quilt folded over the back. I looked out at the street, at the way the streetlight made soft halos on the wet pavement. I thought about the friend who called Lauren her real sister, about the way Lauren had laughed that day, free and untethered, like a woman without a mother. And I thought maybe she is, not because I died, But because she decided she no longer needed the version of me that raised her, she wanted the me who stays quiet, who pays and smiles and does not appear in the slideshow. And so I stayed quiet until the will was read. I wasn't always quiet, not when they were small. I used to sing them awake in the mornings, even on school days when the air was still cold in their rooms and the toaster would jam halfway through. I'd sing old dusty Springfield songs or hum whatever came to mind. And I'd hear the groggy creak of their beds as they stirred. That's how most of our days began, with my voice and a warm towel waiting in the bathroom. I don't think they remember that I used to write notes in their lunchboxes too. Folded napkins with crooked hearts or tiny jokes they'd probably rolled their eyes at by 4th grade. When Lauren was 9, she told me the other kids thought it was weird, so I started writing them on the inside flap instead, just in case she changed her mind. She never told me to stop, but one day the lunchbox came back without the note. I found it still folded in the bottom pocket, untouched. I didn't write another. The things I did for them weren't loud. They weren't grand or flashy. I didn't take them on European vacations or throw Pinterest-worthy birthday parties, but I remembered the things that mattered. I remembered who liked which corner of the cake. Lauren liked the roses, always, and I made sure the pink towel was washed and dry by the time they were out of the bath. When their father had back surgery in '97 and was out of work for 6 months, I picked up weekend shifts at the bookstore downtown. I'd get home just in time to tuck them in, my hands smelling like paper and cardboard, my feet blistered from the concrete floor. But I did it so they wouldn't know there was less. I clipped coupons, skipped new shoes for myself for years, and learned how to make cheap meat stretch across 3 nights, chicken thighs, cans of cream of mushroom soup. I knew how to make dinner feel full, even when the fridge didn't. And I remember every time they were sick, the thermometers lined up on the bathroom counter, my knuckles red from washing pillowcases at 2 a.m. I remember rubbing their backs, watching cartoons with the volume low, holding damp cloths to fevered heads. I remember staying up for days. When Lauren got mono in high school and wouldn't eat, I blended chicken broth and tried every trick my mother taught me, even though it all ended up in the sink. I held her hair, I held the silence. There were holidays, of course. I made sure everyone felt like something. Valentine's Day with handmade cards, Easter baskets until they were far too old. Thanksgiving, I still have the old recipe card from my grandmother. The one for the stuffing Lauren always asked for. I've kept it in a Ziploc bag for decades, the corners browned from use, her handwriting faint but still visible. I never missed a school meeting. Not one. I sat through them all. Even the ones where they talked over me, even the ones where I had to listen to Lauren's teachers tell me she was bright, but too sensitive. She was a daydreamer, that's what they meant. I knew that I was, too. I always defended her. I don't think she ever knew how often I did. When they were teenagers, things got quiet as they often do, but I was still there. I kept the fridge stocked with their favorite things. Even when they barely said a word to me, Lauren started wearing black and writing in notebooks she never let me see. I found them once under her bed while cleaning, not to snoop, just to dust, and when I read a few lines, I felt like I'd trespassed. She was writing poems, angry, beautiful things. I put it back and never mentioned it, but the next day, I bought her a nicer notebook and left it on her pillow. She never said anything about it, but I saw her writing in it. I kept everything. The macaroni necklaces, the crayon cards, the lopsided pottery projects from 3rd grade, I have them in a cedar box under my bed. Still, I thought one day they might like to look through it, laugh at how small their hands once were. But no one's asked to see it. I paid for Lauren's college tuition. Not all of it, but enough. Her father and I had a fund, modest, but built from decades of saying no to things we wanted. We gave it to her in one sitting. He cried. I smiled. She thanked us, and we never brought it up again. When her car broke down senior year, I dipped into my retirement savings. I told her not to worry. She didn't. I hosted her wedding shower in our backyard, strung paper lanterns from the maple trees myself. I spent months planting new petunias around the edge of the garden because she said she liked. Pinks and whites, I cooked everything. I sewed the table runners from old muslin and lace trim. She called it perfect. Then she posted online that it had been done by her incredible friends. When her father died, I was the one who called everyone, who sat through hours of arrangements. Who chose the wood for his casket? Who? I and her dressed the morning of the funeral while she cried in the guest room. I made sure she had shoes. I made sure she had tissues. I held the pieces together so she wouldn't have to afterward. I paid the taxes on the house alone. She didn't ask how. I didn't tell her I'd taken out a small loan against my annuity. I figured what's mine is hers. Eventually, I didn't want her burdened. I wanted her to feel steady. But somewhere along the way, it seems I taught her that my sacrifice was not sacred, just expected. That what I gave wasn't a gift, just a given. That love, once steady and unconditional, could be edited down to convenience. I wonder if she remembers the winter I walked to the pharmacy in a snowstorm because she had a cough and the last of the Robitussin had spilled. I still remember how the snow felt in my boots. I couldn't feel my toes for an hour after, but I got the medicine. I never asked her to remember. I never asked for recognition. But I did hope she might still carry some of it, even just a piece. That maybe one day she'd say, "You were the one who showed up." Instead, I became the one they kept just outside the frame, the one they asked to stay quiet, but memory doesn't need permission. It lives, whether spoken or not, and mine is full. And that is where the hurt began to multiply, not from the one day at the shower, but from the 1,000 days before that, when I gave, and no one ever turned to say, "I remember." It never happens all at once. That's the cruelest part. If they had slammed a door in my face, or told me outright they no longer needed me, maybe I would have had something clear to hold onto, some moment I could point to and say, "There." That's when it broke. But it didn't break. It eroded, like rain on stone. It started, I think, the first Christmas after Henry died. That was 2013. He passed in October, a sudden, quiet heart attack. One moment we were watching the evening news, the next I was calling 911 with shaking hands and my voice barely holding. Lauren came down the next morning. Of course, she was kind, tearful. She stayed the weekend, helped go through his clothes, made us tea. But then she left, and when Christmas came around, she said it would just be easier for them to stay. Up north with his family. It's too fresh, she said, too sad. So I made a pot of chili for myself that year. I watched old holiday movies and set one place at the table. I opened the gifts I'd wrapped for her and her husband. Gloves and a framed photo of her and her dad from when she was 6. I'd had it restored. She sent me a text that night. It just said, "Thanks, Mom. Hope it was okay down there, as if I'd become a separate story, a subtext in her new life. After that, the calls became shorter, more perfunctory. Birthday greetings in rushed voices, Mother's Day texts with flower emojis, not a card, not a call with time in it. I stopped asking questions during the calls. She seemed irritated when I did. I'd say, "How's work?" and she'd reply, "Fine, just busy." So I stopped asking. I started just listening. I became the nod, the soft murmur on the other end of the line. Visits became rare. At first, it was money. She said they were saving up for the house. Then it was her job. Then the pregnancy. Always something reasonable. Always something that made me feel selfish for hoping they'd come. I kept the guest room clean anyway. Fresh sheets. A candle on the nightstand, just in case. but no one ever slept there. When I sent packages, little care boxes, a wear-upon blanket, homemade cookies, they arrived without response. Maybe a delayed text, sometimes nothing, one winter. I sent a handmade scarf for her husband. I'd spent weeks on it. When I visited 3 months later, I found it in the garage, still in the box, unopened, and then came the decisions made without me, the moments where I wasn't consulted, just informed. When they bought their house, I learned about it too. Weeks after the closing, it all happened so fast, she said. When she got promoted, I read about it on Facebook, buried under a sea of congratulations from friends and co-workers. When she chose the name for her daughter, I found out through the baby shower invitations. Hazel Marie. Marie was his mother's name. I'd hoped, quietly, that maybe she'd carry something of mine. A middle name, a nod, even just a syllable. But there wasn't even a whisper of me in it. I didn't say anything. I smiled when she told me. But that night, I sat on the edge of my bed with the quilt Henry and I used to sleep under. And I cried into my hands like a child. The house began to feel louder in its silence, the clock ticking over the sink, the hum of the fridge, the way the floorboards groaned when no one was there to walk them. I filled the days with chores, wiping clean what was already clean, folding linens that hadn't been touched. I started writing grocery lists I didn't need. I went to church more, not for God, but for company, just to sit among people, to hear voices that weren't my own. One Sunday, I baked a pie and drove it to the neighbor's porch. I didn't even ring the bell. I just left it there and drove home. I don't know why. I suppose I needed to feel useful, to give something. Giving had been the only language I knew. When Hazel was born, I wasn't called. I saw the first photo online, Lauren holding her in a hospital bed, glowing. Surrounded by her husband's family, her best friend had posted it. I kept refreshing the screen, waiting for a message. It came 5 hours later. She's here, healthy and beautiful. We're so tired but so happy. We'll call soon. They didn't call for 3 days. I sent a package, tiny sweaters, hand knit again. Soft blue booties. I never saw a picture of her wearing them. At one point, Lauren mentioned that her husband's mother had bought Hazel the cutest little cardigans. She didn't mention mine. When I visited, finally, 2 months later, I was told not to kiss the baby germs. I understood. Of course, I brought food, washed my hands, held her like something sacred, but I wasn't left alone with her. They hovered, watched. I felt more like a guest in a museum than a grandmother. That night, I stayed at a nearby hotel. They said the house was a bit too crowded right now. I said I understood. I lied. There were other small slights, so minor they felt almost imaginary. I'd offer to help with dishes and be told no. I'd send articles I thought she'd like and get no response. I began to check my tone in every message, afraid I was being too much, too present, too needy. I was shrinking myself without even knowing why. Sometimes I'd hear about gatherings through the grapevine, a birthday party, a barbecue, and wonder why I wasn't invited. It was just a small thing, she'd say. If I asked, I stopped asking. I started keeping track, not out of spite, but out of disbelief. I wrote down each quiet hurt in a notebook tucked in my nightstand, not to punish, but to remember that I wasn't imagining it, that my sadness had shape. That I wasn't being oversensitive, I was being erased. I know what people say, that children grow up, that they have lives, that parents must let go. But this wasn't letting go. This was being released without ceremony. This was being unmoored without warning. And still I stayed quiet. I didn't want to make things harder. I didn't want to be the mother who guilted, who clung. I let them forget me, piece by piece. But silence doesn't mean absence, and watching doesn't mean you're blind. I saw the way the story was shifting, how I became the background hum, how my love was rebranded as interference, and I started To wonder if I disappeared entirely, how long would it take them to notice? Not long after, I found out. I remember the letterhead. It was cream-coloured, thick, with the name of a law firm I didn't recognize printed in neat, serifed font across the top. I thought at first it might be a mistake junk mail or some generic estate notification that slipped into my mailbox. By error, it wasn't. My name was typed clearly on the envelope, spelled perfectly. Jeanette M. Hall. It had weight, that kind of weight you can feel even before you open it, a pressure in your palms, a pause in your throat. I took it to the kitchen table, set it beside my tea, and stared at it for maybe half an hour before I slit it open with the butter knife from the drawer. The same knife Henry used to split muffins in the morning. The letter inside was only 3 paragraphs, polite, distant. It stated that my late husband's name had been removed from the joint deed on the family home shortly before his passing, and that new ownership had been filed in the name of Lauren Elizabeth Matthews, my daughter. My name was not on it. I read it again, slower the second time, then again, then a fourth time, standing now, one hand braced against the sink. As if something in me needed anchoring to stay upright. I'd lived in that house for 39 years. Henry and I bought it in 1980, a modest, split level in a quiet part of Silver Spring. Back then, the trees were shorter, and the streets felt impossibly wide. It was the first home we owned. The place we brought Lauren home to, where I watched her take her first steps, eat her first strawberries, learn to ride a bike down the slight slope of our street. That house held birthdays, flu seasons, arguments, and quiet reconciliations. It held the sound of her piano lessons, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, and the hush of Sunday mornings. I thought it was mine, ours, that someday, yes, it would pass to her, but not like this. I didn't understand. I didn't remember signing anything. But the letter was clear. There had been a deed transfer, legal, recorded. Final. My fingers trembled as I called the number at the bottom. The receptionist was kind, distant. She confirmed the documents, confirmed Lauren had retained them through a family attorney. Confirmed the new title. I asked very softly, was there a power of attorney? There was, executed during Henry's illness. I had been listed as unable to serve, due to emotional duress. I hung up and sat down. The silence in the house was deafening. I stared at the teacup. I hadn't even touched it. The steam was long gone, cold now, and thin at the top. I tried to remember what I was doing in the months before Henry died. He'd been in and out of the hospital with a heart condition. There were medications, appointments, days when he slept 12, 14 hours. I was tired. I was worried. I was his wife. I was there. Every day. I don't remember any conversations about the deed. I don't remember being asked to sign away anything. But somehow it had all been rewritten. My name removed, my place erased. That night, I pulled down the fireproof box from the hall closet, the one with our marriage certificate, insurance policies, and the original deed from 1980. I sifted through every paper, every folder, looking for something. Some clue, some date, but everything was silent. The house, the box, even the walls. Silent. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky began to pale, listening to the wind outside and the soft moan of the house settling. I kept thinking, this can't be right. There must be some mistake, a clerical error, a misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The next day, I drove to the county office. I wore the beige cardigan Henry always said brought out my eyes, as if wearing something familiar might protect me. The clerk was polite, efficient. She printed the record, 2 pages. Black ink on pale paper, Lauren's name sat alone under current. Owner. I asked if there had been witnesses, notarization, signatures. She nodded, pointing. Yes, all present, all filed. I saw my own name scratched in pen beside grantor, my own signature. Shaky, uncertain, I didn't remember writing it. I sat in the parking lot afterward with the heat blasting. Even though it was April, I needed something warm to wrap around me, something to fight the cold that had crept under my skin. The betrayal wasn't loud, it was quiet, paper-bound, sanitized. It didn't shout, it whispered you don't matter anymore. I drove home. The house looked the same, red shutters, garden bed overgrown with early tulips. The mailbox still slightly crooked from where the snowplow nudged it last winter, but everything felt altered now. I stepped inside and noticed the creak in the floorboard by the front door. Had it always been that loud? I made a list that night, not out of anger, out of survival. I wrote down what I knew. Henry and I shared ownership. He died in 2013. A new deed was filed in 2014. My name was no longer on it. Lauren had never told me she had been in the house many times since then. I began to notice other things, quiet things. Her tone on the phone when she asked about the lawn, the way she mentioned offhand the resale value of homes in the area, how, during one visit, she'd asked if I'd ever thought about downsizing, and whether I'd want something closer to her. At the time, I thought she was just being considerate. Now I knew it wasn't just a home, it was a plan, a decision made in rooms I wasn't invited into, a future she was writing without me. I wasn't angry. Not yet, that came later. What I felt then was worse, a hollowing, like someone had taken the walls I leaned against and quietly pulled them away, leaving me to stumble in the open. I stopped answering her calls after that. Just for a while, I needed to hear my own voice in the silence again. I needed to remember what I sounded like when I wasn't being asked to smile and nod. I sat with it, with the papers, with the past, and then I did something she never expected. I called a lawyer of my own, the first time I didn't pick up her call. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand and watched it ring until the screen went dark. No anger, just stillness. I let the quiet answer for me. It felt like slipping beneath the surface I'd been skimming for years, finally letting the water close overhead. I didn't owe anyone my voice anymore. Not right then, especially not her. I didn't leave a message. I didn't send a follow-up text. I just went about my day, took out the trash, changed the sheets, made coffee. My hands moved like normal, but something inside me had gone still. It wasn't depression. I know what that feels like. This was different. This was what it feels like when a woman stops performing the role she's been written into. In the days that followed, I began to see my silence as a kind of tool, a quiet chisel, not to hurt, but to reveal something buried underneath. Not to punish, I wasn't interested in that, but to make space for the truth, the real one, not the version they'd asked me to play. I began waking earlier. For 5 a.m., the light came slowly through the windows, and I'd sit in the armchair with a blanket and listen to the birds beginning their work. That's when the house felt most like mine, in those few hours before the world remembered I was still here. The lawyer I found was kind, middle-aged, a little weary in the eyes, like someone who'd carried too many other people's secrets. I brought him the documents, the deed, the letter, my folder of old financials. He read in silence, then looked up and asked softly, "Do you remember signing this?" I shook my head. "No, I don't." We met a few more times, he explained. My options, most of them were bleak. Technically, the transfer was legal, at least on the surface, but he said we could challenge it, not for the house itself, but to look deeper into the power of attorney, into whether I had truly been informed. He used words like undue influence and capacity, words I never imagined would apply to my life. He asked if I had any documentation, old letters, medical records, notes. I didn't. I had memories. Yes. I remembered Lauren sitting next to me in the hospital cafeteria while Henry slept upstairs. asking if I was sure I was up to everything. I remembered the weariness in my body that followed the long days, the way I'd cry quietly in the laundry room. I remembered how much I leaned on her then, because she was all I had. But memories don't carry weight in court, so I began collecting something else. Silence, not absence. Not avoidance, strategic silence. I started writing things down again. Not the hurts, like before. This time, just facts, dates, visits, things said. I began listening more closely, paying attention to what wasn't being asked, and what was being assumed. Every silence in our conversations now sounded like a bell. When Lauren called again the 4th time in 2 weeks, I finally picked up. I kept my voice even, calm. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She asked if I was upset. I said, not anymore. That was the first time I felt her pause, really pause. There was a flicker of unease behind her voice, like she couldn't quite tell what I meant. She asked if she'd done something. I told her, gently, there are things we'll have to talk about eventually. Then I let the silence fall. I didn't rush to reassure her. Didn't fill the gap. I let her feel it. After that, things shifted. She began calling more, little check-ins, a few too many. At first, I thought maybe she'd sensed something, remembered something. But soon it became clear she was circling, not reaching, keeping me in orbit, not pulling me close. One afternoon, she asked if I'd considered getting a companion to help around the house. Just in case, she said, "You're getting older, Mom. It's not a bad idea." That was the first time I felt it directly, the calculation. Not care, not concern, positioning. She was laying a foundation for something. That night, I sat down with my checkbook, my account statements, and every financial document I had. I realized I didn't know exactly what I owned anymore. That scared me. Henry had handled the bigger pieces before he passed, and afterward, I just kept moving. I didn't look closely. I trusted. I spent the next week going through it, all line by line. The annuity, the pension, the home insurance, the savings bond in the drawer from my father. I made a list of everything with my name on it, and everything that wasn't. I didn't realize how much I had quietly given over. The year's little withdrawals, gifts, help that became expected, unspoken obligations disguised as generosity. I began shifting things. Slowly, I opened a new account at a different credit union across town. I moved my will into a locked drawer. I began reading about elder law at night. I made tea and sat with thick printouts, underlining words I'd never thought I'd need to understand. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was clarity, a slow, deliberate returning of my gaze to my own life. I started saying no more often. I said no to a visit I didn't want, no to a financial favor couched in soft words, no to the assumption that I would always be available, always say yes, always smile and thank them for crumbs, and I spoke less. I listened more. I listened when Lauren brought up the idea of transitioning the home, eventually, into something more manageable. I listened when she said they were looking at investments and could probably help me with mine. I listened. And each time, I smiled and changed the subject. I think she began to sense something was changing, that her grip on the story was loosening, and I knew then silence isn't emptiness. It's power, especially for someone who's been spoken over her entire life, the woman who once packed school lunches and swallowed disappointments, who smiled politely in rooms where her presence was barely acknowledged. That woman was still here, but now she had her own pen, and she was rewriting the ending. There's a kind of shift that happens when a woman decides she will no longer be the quiet one. Not loud, not bitter, just no longer playing along. For me, it wasn't a dramatic transformation. There was no haircut, no speech, no great confrontation. The change came like snowfall at night, slow, layered, quietly permanent. I started with The smallest thing, my name. I walked into the bank on a Wednesday morning with a copy of my marriage certificate, Henry's death certificate, and my birth name, the one I hadn't seen in print in nearly 50 years, and I had it restored. On one of my accounts, not all of them, just one. It wasn't about being unmarried. It was about remembering that before I was wife, mother, grantor on a deed, signer of tuition checks, I was someone who had her own name before she gave it away piece by piece, the clerk. A young man with kind eyes handed me the temporary card and said, "There you go, Miss Winslow, Miss Winslow." I hadn't heard it aloud in so long. On the way home, I bought myself flowers, yellow tulips, and a loaf of rye bread from a small bakery I used to pass on the way to Lauren's piano lessons. I didn't need either. That wasn't the point. I took the long way home, drove past the park where Henry used to sit with the newspaper while I watched Lauren play on the swings. The bench was still there, the trees taller, but it was all quieter. Now, faded but not forgotten, that afternoon, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them for the house. It had already been taken. Paper made it true. But I could decide what came next, and so I called a realtor. Her name was Janice, mid-60s, silver hair swept into a twist. She walked through my home, my kitchen with the scuffed cabinets, the faded floral wallpaper in the bathroom, the living room Henry painted sky blue in 1997, and she said, "It's a warm house. It's got a soul." I nodded, but I didn't cry. I was past crying. I'd already mourned the version of the house I thought I still owned. Janice listed it within 2 weeks, and within 3. We had an offer, cash, above asking. Lauren didn't find out until after the closing. She called me 6 times that day. I didn't answer. The messages came one after another. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? We should have talked first." You know how much that house meant to the family. I sat in the guest room of a short-term rental, a quiet little place near the water in Havre de Grace, and listened to every message. Her voice grew tighter with each one. Not grief, not worry, panic. Like something had slipped from her grasp. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I went for a walk. The new place was small, just 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a tiny screened porch that faced a sliver of the bay. But it had what I needed: peace, clean light, a kitchen big enough to bake, a window over the sink. I hadn't told anyone where I was going, just packed the essentials, left the rest to the movers, and drove east with a thermos of tea and a box of my journals on the passenger seat. For the first time in years, I was untethered. It's strange how quickly a body recalibrates when no one is watching it. I no longer waited for the phone to ring. I no longer checked my tone before speaking. I no longer softened my truths for fear of being told I was being too much. I found a small writing group at the library, older women, mostly widows. A few retired teachers. We met on Thursdays and wrote longhand about memory, regret, joy. One of them, Helen, had been a nurse for 40 years. She said, "The hardest part of getting old isn't the body, it's the fact that you've seen too much and still have to keep going." I understood that deep in my bones. I wrote more than I expected. Not poetry, not stories, just fragments, things I'd never said aloud. I wrote about the time Lauren cried when she didn't make the dance team, about the way Henry used to hum when he made coffee, about the Christmas I got a new coat and pretended I didn't notice the tag said it was from the sale rack, about the way silence had become my second skin. I wrote, and I didn't edit. Some afternoons, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the water shift in the wind. Not much happened, but I felt present, and for once that was enough. I got a new phone, a new number. I gave it to only 5 people. I didn't shut Lauren out, not completely. I sent her a note handwritten and told her I'd moved. I didn't explain, I didn't apologize. I gave her the mailing address. I told her I was safe, that I needed time. She didn't respond, and that was fine. I began keeping my own calendar, my own routines: breakfast at 7, a walk at 8, journaling at 10, tea by 2. I didn't wait for holidays or birthdays to feel like I mattered. I gave myself reasons. Instead, one Friday, I bought a pair of soft leather shoes I didn't need. I wore them around the house with my robe, just because they felt good. That night, I made myself a small steak, lit a candle, and played old records on a second-hand player I found at a thrift store. It was a good evening. In that quiet space, I stopped asking what I could have done differently. I stopped replaying the baby shower. I stopped wondering if maybe I hadn't loved enough, or too much, or in the wrong way. Instead, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: power, not the kind that takes from others, not the kind that needs to be seen, just the quiet power of a woman who knows her worth again. I still remembered everything: the hurts, the erasure, the way my name vanished from documents and stories alike. But those memories stopped wounding. They just became part of the map, not the destination. I moved differently now, not for them. For me, absence doesn't announce itself, it just settles in. One morning becomes 1 week, and then a season passes, and suddenly the person you used to call for recipes or rides or reassurance just isn't there anymore. Their voice doesn't echo through the phone line. Their birthday card doesn't arrive. The towel you borrowed stays folded in the drawer, untouched. That's how it happened with Lauren. I didn't vanish. I just stopped circling. She knew where I was. I'd told her. But I no longer offered the reminders, the check-ins, the small nudges of care that had come to feel like obligations. And in my silence, something in her life began to tilt small at first, then noticeable. The first thing she lost was convenience. No one to watch Hazel when daycare closed unexpectedly. No one to show up early to birthday parties with extra chairs or to stay late washing up while everyone else posted pictures. No one to sew the hem on the dress she'd bought last minute for a wedding. I had done all of that, year after year, without her needing to ask. Now, I wasn't there. I heard through a cousin distant, still in touch in that holiday card sort of way, that Lauren had hired a sitter. Young, kind, but temporary. The woman cancelled twice, and Lauren had to call out of work once when Hazel came down with strep. My cousin said Lauren seemed tired, more than usual. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. But I did feel something close to clarity. When you give endlessly, people forget the shape of your presence. They forget that what seems small, a warm meal, a folded blanket, a phone call when they're driving home in traffic, is actually a scaffold, a quiet net holding everything just a little steadier. When I stepped back, the net unhooked, I knew she missed me in waves, not words. The messages became softer, less certain. She began sending short updates, like she was tossing stones into a pond, hoping I'd ripple back. Hazel lost her first tooth this week. She read her first sentence today. She asked about the sweater you made. Each one sat unanswered for days. Not out of punishment, but because I'd learned not to rush in where I wasn't fully seen. Eventually, she stopped texting, but then came the questions through other people. A voicemail from her husband's sister. Lauren's been quiet lately, worried about you. Are you okay? A message from the church secretary back home. Your daughter asked if you were still attending, say. Vices said she hadn't heard from you. Even a letter from an old neighbor I ran into Lauren at the market. She mentioned she wasn't sure where you were living these days. They could have asked me, but they didn't. Instead, they asked around me, like I was fog on the edge of a mirror there, but unreachable. I sat with those messages, read them slowly, listen twice. And I understood what was happening. They missed the version of me that asked for nothing, gave everything, and remained grateful for scraps. That version was gone, and without her, things began to fall apart in subtle ways. Lauren's holiday cards used to arrive like clockwork, all curated smiles and scripted updates. But the year after I moved, there was none. No card, no picture of Hazel with bows in her hair, holding a chalkboard that said her grade and favourite. Food, I imagined they had started and stopped the process. Too tired to push through it, she'd taken on more than she realised. Not just tasks, but emotional weathering. The kind of resilience I'd provided without naming it, the steady presence that doesn't fix everything, but holds space while others fall apart. Now that space was empty. And she began to fill it with busyness, social posts, baking projects, overscheduled weekends, but it rang hollow, even through a screen. The brightness felt strained. Like she was trying to build a life that didn't need me, and realizing how heavy that scaffolding really was. I watched quietly. I wasn't gloating. There was no satisfaction in her struggle, just recognition. This is what happens when you treat presence like a background utility, something reliable, renewable, taken for granted, and then you flip the switch and realize you don't know where the light comes from. Hazel was growing. I could tell. By the new photos, taller, hair longer, eyes more aware. I sometimes wondered what Lauren told her about me, if I was the distant grandmother who lived far away, or if my name still carried weight in their home. I wondered if she still wore the blue cardigan I made, the one with the seashell buttons. I imagined it shoved in the back of a drawer, then pulled out one day when everything else was in the wash. And maybe, just maybe, Lauren would see it, really see it and remember my hands, the yarn, the care, or maybe not. Maybe my memory had become something quiet and inconvenient. But even memories can shape the air. I went to a small cafe every Saturday morning, same table, corner seat, black coffee and a biscuit with marmalade. I brought a book sometimes, but mostly I watched people, weather, movement. I noticed how many women sat alone, not sad, just present. Older women, reading, knitting, staring out at the sea like it owed them nothing and gave them everything. We never spoke, but I saw myself in them. That's when I realized something else. They hadn't just lost me as a mother, they lost me as a witness, the one who remembered their birthdays without needing Facebook to prompt her. Who knew which pasta Lauren hated as a child and which lullaby made her fall asleep, who kept the story of them, the long, quiet, unspoken parts alive. Now there was no one to say, I remember when you loved green. No one to say, you used to hum that when you were sad. No one to reflect the truth back to them in moments when the world made them feel like they didn't know who they were. Without me, the archive was gone, and maybe, slowly, they were beginning to feel that. Maybe that's why, one quiet Tuesday afternoon, I found a letter in my new mailbox, no return address. Handwritten, but the handwriting, I knew it like breath. It was the way she wrote my name, not Mom in big, casual loops like she used to sign notes on the fridge when she was 14, asking for a ride to the mall. Not Mother, which she reserved for birthday cards once she'd gone off to college and started using her full signature. This was different. Jeanette, it was the first word on the envelope. Just that, written slowly, precisely, as if she wasn't sure what name belonged to me anymore. I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. I didn't recognize the paper, it wasn't her usual stationery. The thick kind with soft blue edging she used for holidays. This was plain, like printer paper folded twice. The return address was left blank, a cautious choice, or a humble one, maybe both. I sat at the small kitchen table, where the morning sun just barely touches the edge of the sugar bowl. I poured myself coffee and waited for the cup to cool, even though I'd been waiting for something like this for months. When I finally opened it, the first line made my throat close. I don't know how to talk to you anymore, so I'm writing this, because it's the only way I can hear myself think. There was no greeting, no soft entry. Just the truth, raw and deliberate. She went on, she told me she hadn't meant to hurt me, that she'd never intended for things to unravel the way they had. That somewhere along the way, her life had begun to move faster than her awareness, and by the time she realized what was being lost, it had already slipped to far out of reach. She said she didn't know how much she had depended on me until I was gone, not just for childcare or help or advice, but for something more unspoken, that feeling of being tethered to someone who knew her history better than she did, someone who remembered the version of her that didn't have it all together. She confessed that the deed hadn't been planned to shut me out, that it was presented by her husband's attorney during Henry's illness as a practical consolidation, and that she'd signed the papers quickly, not asking the questions she should have asked, not thinking about what it meant for me, only what it would simplify. She said she hadn't known I'd been listed as under duress, that it hadn't even crossed her mind that such a phrase could be tied to my name. She said she was sorry, not in a grand, dramatic way, not with flowery language or pleas for forgiveness, but in the smallest, most human way. I'm sorry I didn't see you while you were still standing right in front of me. I read that line twice, then 3 times. I let it sit inside my chest like a stone, not heavy, but grounding, the kind of weight that reminds you you're still here. She talked about Hazel, about how she'd asked where Grandma had gone, and how she didn't know how to answer. She wrote that Hazel still wore the cardigan sometimes, the blue one, even though it was getting tight in the arms, that she didn't want to let it go. She said that when she tried to tell Hazel stories about me, she stumbled, that she realized she hadn't stored enough of them in words, that she'd let the living of our days replace the telling of them, and now she was struggling to remember the details. She asked me what your favorite color is. I couldn't answer. I'm so sorry for that. I closed my eyes then. For a moment, I felt like I could hear her, the little girl version, not the woman who wrote this letter. The girl who used to sit cross-legged on the floor with her shoes off, chewing on the ends of her hair while I braided it. The girl who once whispered to me at bedtime, "Promise you'll always know where I am," and I had, for most of her life I had, until she stopped wanting to be found. I turned the page. She said she wasn't asking for anything, that she didn't expect me to forgive her or even to respond. She just wanted me to know that the silence had changed her, that my absence had shown her something she hadn't been ready to see, that love isn't infinite when taken for granted, that people who are always there can disappear, and that sometimes they need to. She ended with one line that made my breath catch. "If you write back, I'll read it twice." I sat there for a long time after finishing it, the pages resting in my lap, the coffee gone cold beside me. I didn't cry. There weren't tears left in this part of me anymore. But I felt something shift, like a door had opened quietly in a room I hadn't entered in years. I thought about writing her back immediately, but something in me said to wait, not out of pride, not out of punishment, but because some answers are more sacred when they're not rushed. Instead, I pulled out one of my old journals, the brown leather one with the frayed ribbon bookmark, and flipped to a clean page. I began with a date, and then I started writing to myself. Not to Lauren, not yet, to me. I wrote to the woman who had been quiet for so long she forgot what her voice sounded like, to the woman who had stood at the sink drying dishes while entire conversations happened around her, treating her like wallpaper, to the woman who had held her tongue, held her grief, held her family until there was nothing left in her hands. I wrote about what I had done, what I had carried, what I had let go of without recognition. I told myself I had done enough, and then I forgave myself for not having left sooner. I sat with that journal entry for 2 days, read it aloud, whispered it into the sea breeze from my porch. Then I folded the letter from Lauren and placed it inside the journal. I didn't respond yet, but I knew I would. One day soon, I would. Write her back, but not to explain, not to rehash, not even to reopen. I would write her a letter that told the truth, the kind of truth a mother can only tell when she no longer needs to be needed. When she's no longer trying to be loved. Back into usefulness. I would write with clarity, and I would sign it, not as Mom, but as Jeanette M. Winslow, and I would mean every letter of it. These days, I wake before the sun, not because I have to. No alarm clock, no restless child down the hallway. No husband coughing softly in the next room. I wake because the quiet calls me. It isn't silence like it used to be, not the hollow, aching kind. This quiet is full, alive. I take my tea on the porch most mornings, wrapped in a whereupon shawl that smells faintly of cedar. The bay stretches out in front of me, grey and soft, the kind of water that never demands anything. Gulls rise and scatter, the wind carries salt and distance, and I sit with it. I let it brush against my face, reminding me that time is still passing, and I am still here. I don't keep much in the way of a schedule anymore. I walk when I feel like it, usually after breakfast. Down a narrow trail lined with seagrass and scrub pine, I pass the same weathered bench, the same patch of lichen-covered stone. Sometimes I sit, sometimes I don't. It doesn't matter. There's no one waiting on the other end of my day now. No one to ask what I did or didn't do. That used to feel like loss. Now it feels like peace. I planted herbs in a window box a few months ago. Basil, thyme, some lavender for the bees. They don't always grow straight, but they live. That's enough. I don't fuss over them the way I used to fuss over everything. I water them when they droop. I pinch back the flowers when I remember. I let things go to seed if they want to. That's what I've learned. More than anything, letting things go doesn't mean you didn't love them. It just means you love yourself enough to stop bleeding for them. I see people from time to time. At the cafe, at the library, at the Thursday group where we write in silence for 20 minutes before sharing only if we choose. There's no performance here. No need to make small talk if the day feels heavy. Just women, most of us invisible to the world, seeing each other clearly. I've written several letters since Lauren's. Some I sent, most I burned, not in anger, in ceremony. There is something sacred about turning pain into ash, watching the edges curl, the words lift like smoke, knowing they don't have to live inside me anymore. I never did write Lauren back the way I thought I would. Not a formal reply. Not a page of reflections or gentle corrections. Instead, I mailed her a photograph. It was from 1993, one I'd found in a box I'd nearly thrown out. Lauren was 8, standing in the backyard beside a cardboard fort we'd built from old refrigerator boxes. She's laughing, hair wild, hands covered in red marker. Her father is off to the side, half out of frame, holding up the hose, pretending to spray her. And I'm there in the reflection of the sliding glass door, a blurry, smiling shape, almost invisible, but not quite. I wrote 2 words on the back. I remember. That was all. No signature. No explanation, just the gift of memory. I never heard back, and maybe I never will. But something in me feels settled, knowing that part of the story is now in her hands. She can keep it, or toss it, or bury it deep inside her sock drawer. That's hers to choose. My part is done. Some nights I sit by the open window with a journal on my lap and nothing to say. That's all right, too. Not every page has to hold something profound. Some pages are meant to be empty. Space is its own form of honesty. I've stopped trying to prove that I was good, that I was enough, that I gave all I had. I know I did, and that knowing is quiet and wide and clean. It has no sharp edges. I don't dream of reconciliation. That part of me, the part that waited for the phone to ring, that checked the mailbox with a flicker of hope she's been laid to rest, not in bitterness, in relief. We are not all meant to be understood in this lifetime. And that's okay. Hazel will grow up. Maybe one day she'll ask harder questions. Maybe she'll feel something missing and go looking. And maybe she'll find pieces of me in the stories left behind. In the stitches of that cardigan, in the echo of her mother's voice when she sings lullabies. Or maybe she won't. Maybe she will live a good life and never wonder. That's her journey, not mine. I live differently now. I speak only when I want to. I give only when it feels true. I say yes because I choose to, not because I'm afraid of being left behind. I carry myself like someone who remembers the cost of shrinking. This life, this quiet, simple, honest life, it is not rich in noise or applause, but it is rich in soul. And that is enough. There's a phrase I heard once, years ago, in a film I can't remember the name of. A woman, older, wiser, said, "Sometimes you don't leave to be followed, you leave to remember how it feels to walk." That's where I am now, walking. Not toward anything. Just walking. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. It came quietly, as these things often do, a call from the attorney's office. Not the one Lauren had used, but one I'd been in touch with myself. For over a year now. A soft-spoken woman named Teresa left a message. "Ms. Winslow, the reading of Mr. Hall's amended will has been scheduled. You're listed as primary beneficiary, and your attendance is requested." I had to listen to it twice. Mr. Hall, Henry, amended. It took me a moment to remember, to trace back through the months, and then I did. For years before his death, after a long weekend where Lauren and her husband had left our home in a storm of muttered arguments and slammed car doors, Henry and I had sat on the back porch. Watching fireflies in the still summer air, he was quiet that night, like always, but heavier than usual. He had his bourbon in hand, a little ice melting along the rim. He looked out over the lawn and said, "You do all the work, Jeannie." I thought he meant the house. I laughed, said something about gutters or laundry. He shook his head. "No, I mean this whole family. You're the roots, the reason it doesn't fall apart." I remember that moment clearly now, the way he said it, not dramatic, not grand. Just like someone stating a fact long left unspoken. A few weeks after that, we visited a lawyer. He didn't tell Lauren. He didn't tell anyone. He just said, "Let's make sure you're protected. If I go first, I forgot about that visit." Life rushed in. Henry got sick. Everything blurred. But now, here it was, that quiet, private protection come home. The reading took place in a small conference room in a red brick building in downtown Silver Spring. Not fancy. Just proper. A long table, water in glass pitchers. Folders arranged in neat stacks. I arrived early. I always do. I wore a navy blouse and the pearl earrings Henry gave me for our 20th anniversary. Nothing loud, just steady. Lauren came in 10 minutes late, hair swept up in a hurried knot, phone in hand, husband trailing behind her. She barely looked at me. I didn't speak. The lawyer, not mine, but the estate executor, was a tall man in his 60s, glasses low on his nose. He opened a folder, cleared his throat, and began. It started predictably, formalities, dates. Then the assets, the house, which had already changed hands long before Henry passed. There was nothing to dispute. The car, long sold. The retirement accounts, modest, divided. A few bonds, a few savings accounts, and then came the part no one was expecting. To my wife, Jeanette M. Winslow. I leave all residual personal property, including but not limited to all family heirlooms, photo albums, furniture, jewelry, letters, and personal effects held within our shared residence at the time of this writing. These are hers as they have always been. He paused, glanced up. No one said a word. He continued, to my daughter, Lauren Elizabeth Hall. I leave a single item, the first photograph we ever took together. It is framed and marked with the Date, I hope she remembers what we meant to each other before the world got noisy. Lauren shifted in her chair. Her husband looked confused. And then the final clause. In the event of dispute over the location, sale, or proceeds of the house at our shared address, I defer all decision-making power to my wife, Jeanette, whose judgment I trust without reservation. It wasn't about money, the value was never in the things, it was in the recognition. He had seen me, even then, even as I stood silent beside hospital beds, folded laundry, and made arrangements. He had left me something no one else had, the right to decide. When the reading ended, the lawyer nodded respectfully toward me. I thanked him and stood. Lauren didn't speak. She looked stunned. But not wounded, not yet. Her husband whispered something to her, too low to catch. I left the building without looking back. Outside, the sky was overcast, the kind of grey that softens the edges of everything. I stood by my car and let the wind press against my blouse. Not cold, not warm, just a reminder that the season was changing. Back at home, I pulled out the journal I kept tucked in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't write much that night, just one sentence. He gave me back the story, and in a way, he did, not with grandeur, not with wealth, but with quiet dignity. He had corrected, in his own final way, the erasure that began long before he passed. He had said, I remember, I sat on the porch for hours that night, watching the sky fold into itself. A few days later, a small parcel arrived, no return. Address inside was a photograph. It was the one Henry had left her Lauren, and him on the front porch. She couldn't have been more than 5. He's holding her in his lap. She's laughing on the back, in Lauren's handwriting. Just 3 words. I remember too, that was all. No note, no apology, no request, just those words. And something in me exhaled. I didn't write back, not because I didn't want to, but because there was nothing left that needed to be said. She remembered. That was enough. Now, the days are slow and kind. I make bread when I feel like it. I hang laundry in the sun and feel no need to rush. I take my time. I savor things. I once skipped over the sound of my spoon in the sugar jar, the way the light moves across the floor just before noon. I am not waiting for anything. Not for a call. Not for a letter. Not even for understanding. Some stories don't end with reunion. Some end with peace. And some, if you're lucky, end with you sitting exactly where you belong, quiet, steady, seen. My name is Jeanette Winslow. And that was the day the will was read.